Hey everyone, welcome to the Path to Pro series. My name is Jake Middleton, and in this video, I chat with Robert Yip, who is one of the most experienced performance coaches in esports that has worked with a variety of top esports organizations. We chat about what mental performance training is and why it's important for players, teams, and organizations, Robert's philosophy as a coach and his approach to mental performance in esports, how to assess and develop mental skills, as well as the future of mental performance training in esports. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Welcome, Robert. Thanks so much for being a part of the show. I'm excited to chat with you more about mental performance in esports. For those that may not know, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what you do?
Sure. Great to be on the show. Thanks for having me. My background is in originally traditional sports. So I used to coach rugby, athletics, volleyball, Irish Gaelic games as well. And I kind of came across esports around 2012. And I slowly, after spending some time like as a hobby, kind of found myself inside of it. So around 2015, I worked with Origin in Summer Split and then moved on to Immortals 2016. So for the past 4 or 5 years. Full time, I've been working in esports for League of Legends primarily, and my role is as performance coach for the most part is looking after the mental, physical, and psychological well being of players. I know it sounds really uh, all encompassing, but we'll probably get into it later on exactly what the job actually entails. But performance coach would be my main title.
Okay, fantastic. And yeah, I think we'll get more into all of those different things, but focusing a little bit more on maybe mental performance for this conversation. But for people that may be unfamiliar with what sports psychology or mental skills training is, like what is that? And then why do you think it's so important for players, teams, and organizations?
It's a really good question. For me, I feel like it's important because in esports, the players tend to get picked up. They can tend to get picked up from the ladder. They get picked up from playing solo queue. So the raw talents are what bring organizations over to see them and sign them for their team. And at that point, they haven't gone through any traditional sports coaching before. They haven't been conditioned to work under a coach or learn different things. They've gotten to where they are based off of like the raw talent. So for them, there's such a huge potential for them in terms of like how much more they can learn about themselves and how to compete at the highest level from the mental aspect. It's very commonplace for players or athletes in different sports, golf, basketball, tennis, everything, where they say that the higher up you go, the more it's between the ears. It's more of a mental game. It's that like extra 1% or it means a lot more. That given all things equal physicality and skill, that it's the mental side of things that differentiates you from finishing first, second, or third. And esports is kind of blessed in that area in the sense that it's very, very young. It's not as developed as other sports. So it's only recently, maybe the last 2 years, where players that I've seen are a lot more comfortable with psychological terms, with psychological training, with actually being coached outside of the game instead of just, I only want to learn how to play the game. I only want to learn how to click the buttons and press the mouse. And now that they're a lot more open to it, it's an easier sell. And when the overall climate, the overall region lends itself towards being more open, then the potential for growth is like really, really big. So I feel like esports is that kind of like uncharted frontier where they're aware of what, sports psychology can do. And it started around 2015, 16 and really blew up since then. But now people are really investing in not just mental health, but also physical health as well.
Completely agree. Yeah, it's interesting in traditional sports where even in things like long distance endurance events where physical fitness is so important, but all the elite athletes talk about the most important thing is, like you said, between the ears. It's the mental game, and yet traditional sports athletes and even esports players too, like when they talk about it, they don't really put an emphasis on the mental training. It's more still on the physical side. So completely agree with all that you said there. I'm interested in learning more about like what is your philosophy as a coach, a performance coach, and how do you approach mental performance training specifically in esports?
Good question again. I think it's changed ever since I got into esports. When I came in 2015, I guess my initiative was, oh, traditional sports are doing so much correct. We need to look towards traditional sports, copy what they're doing. There's so much research and practical knowledge behind it. So I was like, okay, just do this and you'll get better, easy peasy. And what I guess was the stumbling point for me, or like the barrier to entry, was that in esports, it's a competitive scene, but at the same time, there are definitely things that are unique to esports that aren't necessarily holding us back, but make it a little bit harder for players to copy and paste exactly what we see in traditional sports, right? So when I came in, I was like, these things are, it's a non-negotiable, and we do them. And sometimes the players would be like, yeah, we like this, it's okay, we see how we're doing it. And then sometimes they struggled with it, right? And I think, for example, something like meditation, something like mindfulness, something like being more aware and present in yourself is difficult, not because they're esports athletes, but because of the fact that the whole environment is centered around kind of like instant gratification, the social media, the game itself, how they do things, their daily routine. They want that answer now. And telling a player, okay, I have the answer, but I want to guide you towards the answer because there's a lot more benefit in, showing you how to get there yourself. And they're like, no, 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 no. It feels really uncomfortable. They just want the answer A, B, and C, and then they can pick one of them. So for that, it's not necessarily blaming esports. It's more of like, this is the environment that we live in. So we have to compensate for that as much as we can. Like mental skills training in esports is like obviously very, very important. And I've learned that it takes time for change. It takes more time for change to last longer as well. So you have to be patient with who you're working with. I had a very coachable team in my first year, and they would pretty much do like whatever they were asked because they were, good professionals and good people. But as you go through and you learn to meet more people, you have to start developing different skills. You have to develop like more patience and more understanding about, oh, this guy's different. He had a different upbringing. He's got different motivations. I can't come at it from the same way. And if you're a plumber or a carpenter, you have your toolbox that you bring with you when you go to work. As a sports psychologist or a sports psych, you really have your words. So all you can do is sit down with a guy, try to get to know him, try to build a rapport up, try to figure out like what he wants in life and then how you can get him there. And it's not just a simple case of like, hey, this is really good for you, just do this. And if they don't do it, it means you're a bad coach. So many different examples in traditional sports of coaches who, they work with one team and not work with another team is because there's different personalities and you have to learn how to get along with them. You need that buy-in, and sometimes you're not going to have complete buy-in. To steal a quote from Summer Scott, I don't want, complete, buy-in from you guys, but I just want like complete commitment. I want you guys to try it 100%, and that's all that you can ask for when you're asking people to do something that's outside of their comfort zone.
You bring up really good points there. I like the one on instant gratification and the way that just that's how our society is now. Um, and you kind of talk a lot around getting buy-in, and that's actually something I was really curious to learn more about how you get buy-in with your players. You kind of touched on it. It's developing the rapport, developing the relationships with them. But are there any other strategies that you utilize? Like, um, for myself and the way we go about it as of now, it's really just kind of like showing them the why this is important, developing that relationship, and then providing the practical tools and helping them get those reps in. But I'm curious to
hmm
see what your thoughts are on that.
It's pretty similar. I think creating a buy-in is like, I don't want players to create buy-in in what I'm asking them to do. I don't want them to or have to believe that they 100% believe in the benefits of exercise or imagery or whatever it might be. But I want them to have 100% belief in me. That if I say, "Hey, we should do this. It's really good for you." I want them to understand and believe that I have their best interests at heart. That what I'm trying to get them to do is for them. It's not I don't have an ulterior motive. You're not paid by how many times you can bring someone to the gym, right? You just want them to be happy and to be able to play pain-free and play well and consistently, and their success is your success. So, for me, a lot of it, especially like the first week or two, is just spent, observing the players, trying to figure out like what they kind of gravitate towards, like what are their norms, and try to figure out like if this is helping them or hindering them. And I don't want them to feel like every time they see me, I'm trying to get them to do something or change them because that's, in essence, not really what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to help them along, trying to figure out how to bring them from point A to point B. And sometimes it takes longer, and sometimes it's very, very quick. Some people are very interested. You can tell from the first meeting, the guys that are like kind of like leaning towards you, lots of eye contact, a lot of nodding while you're talking. And then you see some guys who are like leaning back, their arms are folded, they're a little bit defensive, they're a little bit uncomfortable, and that's okay.
Mhm.
Like that's normal. And you just have to be a little bit aware around that. And then you have to spend a little bit extra time outside of, regular workshops and one-on-ones. Like it's it's a meme at this point, but like, bring a guy out for a walk, go for a coffee, etc., etc. Something where it's not work talk always. And for me, that's the buy-in. It's like, hey, if you can respect me and you can trust me, then I can help you. And that's the first step for me.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, you're always going to have those early adopters and you have the late adopters. But yeah, developing that relationship is so important. And I like your style of guiding. You guide them, and it's a collaborative relationship that you have. You're not telling them what to do. As we know, when you tell someone what to do, they're not really likely going to do what you say. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's guiding them, and to be able to do that, I think that's can be really helpful for maybe some of the practitioners that might be listening, but for players themselves who maybe they're aspiring professionals, like, and they're listening to this, and they're unaware of maybe holistic training or mental performance training. Like, what's your kind of like message to them, and why it's so important?
I think when you're aspiring, when you're coming up, you're still grinding. They like to say that grinding for, whatever LCS or LEC. You're working on one thing only, which is trying to get really good at the video game to get noticed. And that's 100% the best route to take. You do have to put in the time, you do have to climb high on the ladder, you do have to make a name for yourself. The part that you might be missing is that all the other outside of the game variables that you can control through effort, these are things that will help you play better. These are not things that you do as like a side quest or a bonus to what you're doing. So, getting good sleep, well, you'll play better the next day. There's no reason why you wouldn't. Like, there's all the science behind it. I've used the example for some of my players before where they're like, I don't think that if I get better sleep, I play better, or bad sleep doesn't affect me. And then I'll always say, are you a human? And they'll go, yes, I'm a human. And I'll say, okay, it affects you. It affects everyone that's bound by the laws of physiology, right? So like good sleep, good eating, exercise, most of the things you don't actually have to deliberately perform well in. You just do them. Exercising, you get the immediate like reactionary benefits from doing it, like sleeping well, you wake up better, etc., etc. So these things will make you play better. So guys that are like maybe hit like a wall, or like they're stumbling a little bit and they're kind of stuck in, some sort of like elo trap or elo hell, like the things that you're doing outside of the game will have such a huge impact on the inside of the game performance that it's actually like very, very, very like short-sighted just to say
Mhm.
that I'll start doing these things when I have to go to the highest level, because you will, but you might as well start now, because building these habits are actually kind of difficult for some people. And a lot of the time, it's just really a case of convenience. I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to exercise. I don't have the time. Like one solo queue game that you could win, you could lose. You're probably better investing that into taking a break, or going for a run, or doing something else. And you're there's not enough, let's say, tracking when it comes to like research in terms of like the amateur pro athlete who's grinding on a good, let's say, healthy lifestyle versus the ones that aren't. It's difficult. But what I've seen is pro players that are kind of like following the rules and abiding by like guidelines, they're actually seeing the benefits from like living this lifestyle. Their energy levels are a lot more consistent. They're more alert at the beginning of the day. They have more stamina for playing all of their scrims. They're happier people as well. And it shows a healthy person outside the game is going to be a healthy person in the game as well.
Definitely, yeah. You're going to be able to play longer at the highest levels, and you might as well start now, because once you get to that level, if you don't have those skills, it's just going to make it that much harder for you. I like your point on the research and like sleep. Like, a lot of people I've found, they think that they can get by with 5, 6 hours of sleep, maybe even less than that. And there is this gene, that people think about. Oh, I've got the gene. I don't need to sleep as long. But just to let people know, that gene, like, you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to have that gene. So
Yeah.
more often than not, you need to be getting at least 7 hours of sleep a night. So again, like, the goal is to grind yourself up. That's the most important thing. Like you had said, like, you want to get noticed. But the more you can incorporate those things, take breaks, that's going to help you really not only achieve your goal, but once you get there, be able to stay at the top. Um, so great stuff. In terms of like the way organizations are now, some teams have sports psychologists, some don't. Um, if you're a player and you don't have access to these kinds of resources, like, what would you recommend them to do? Like, how can they assess their mental skills, and how can they go about kind of improving those?
That's a It's an interesting premise, because when you think about a sports psych or someone that works with mental skills, they're developing individual traits of players. I think there's like a whole lot of intrinsic value from having a sports psych working with a team to help like really develop the culture, like build it up from the inside out. So it's not a case of like you're only going to work one on one with the player. There's so many moving parts involved in a team, especially a pro team with, you've got GMs, managers, coaches, players. You got so many different people that are milling around that it's a it's kind of like a everyone's got their own different flavor, and when you put it all together, you're not really sure what you're going to get out of it. But the stronger teams are the ones that have a lot more tangible kind of a culture within them, and these are ones that are actually a lot more deliberate. It's very rare you're going to kind of stumble across a winning team and it's done kind of without thinking about it. Usually, there's a lot of things in place. There's people in place in positions of authority and leadership that are pushing a narrative, pushing themes. They're pushing people towards a certain agenda. These are the guys that say, "Hey, we don't do that here. Like, we're not going to do that anymore. Like, we're doing this instead." So they're basically doing course correction for behaviors and thinking patterns. And that's what I think a lot of people don't really understand is because it's not really their remit. It's not really something that they have been brought up to recognize or be aware of. And that was one of the things that for me I started looking at as soon as I came into esports. I was trying to figure out like, so why are we doing this? Asking probably a million stupid questions, but they had to be asked. Like, why are we doing this? Why not this way? Can we do it this way? And et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of awareness that you bring towards how people are doing things and like how they're thinking and acting with each other can change fundamentally how a team actually can pull together and apply themselves and achieve more going forward. So I feel like regarding how teams and organizations like utilize sports psychs, I think it could be more all inclusive. You could have a sports psych working across multiple titles, working with a Valorant team, the League of Legends team, and the CS:GO team, because right now it's kind of siloed in the sense that okay, you're the CS:GO sports psych, you're the Valorant sports psych, and you don't really mix. And that does kind of create some sort of like a insular mentality. But at the same time, I see so much value in when, especially when you have these facilities in kind of like cross training or like cross breeding the teams with each other, so that you have like a hey, this is the Team Liquid culture, and you can see it across every title we have. This is the TSM culture, you can see it across every title we have. And I guess like if you're in a CEO position or an owner position, that kind of a thing is pretty valuable in a sense that when you're joining one team, they're doing the same things as the other team. Like they're living the same way. They're saying the same things. Like sure, you're going to have in speak and self team specific vernacular in teams, but that kind of a culture where you know you're not going to see the Valorant team eating McDonald's while the CS:GO teams like working out in the gym and having like broccoli and rice. So it's that thing like where you're looking around, it just feels like hey, we're one big giant family. And I think CNI might have done that regarding they brought in an army psych to help with the league team. I'm not sure if he worked with different teams, but he was there to help them instill culture, as far as I know, which I think is like honestly a really really good avenue that most teams don't really look into. They just look at help the team perform better on stage, work with the players one on one, and then if they don't, they usually you know clear shop and change players or change staff, and they try to do it again. But in actual fact, there's a lot of value from just like trying to keep as much as you can from the previous year, make some refinements, and then carry it over for the next year, because you don't want to have to just wash your hands of like lack of success and then try to do it again. That's my opinion on the whole thing.
I completely agree. Like you bring up such good points. Like building a championship culture. It's easier. I shouldn't say it's easier than traditional sports, but you're focusing on one team, right? Whereas in esports, they have multiple teams within the organization, so they do become siloed and it's kind of segmented. But I think that the coaches and the management, a lot of times, maybe are unaware of how much influence that they have on creating the culture. And it's interesting as I'm finding a lot of the work that we're doing, it's like we have almost a better chance of getting results and success with organizations is working with the coaches and the management more so than the players. Because unfortunately, the model right now is players come in, they'll play. If they have a bad season, then yeah, they get moved on to another team. And so we're working with players and developing these skills. But like we talked about, it's long-term development. And then unfortunately, then they go to another team. So definitely there's a lot of problems there that need to be fixed and worked on. And I feel like they will be eventually. But building that championship culture is super important. In terms of like coping, like if you're a player on one of these orgs and maybe you want it to be different, even coping with like just the game too, like grinding so much, like where do you see coping skills at right now in esports, and like how can players learn how to cope better?
I think it hasn't changed too much regarding like when I started. Players have team-centric coping strategies where they do things together as a team, and then outside of the game they have individual tendencies, and some of them are not super healthy, but it's what the player has kind of been leaning on since they started playing, or it's what they find value out of. And some of them can be just distractionary coping strategies where they try to just take their mind away completely from what they've been thinking about all day. And the trouble with that is that when the stress increases and then you have to go back to your avoidance strategy again, you're not really dealing with the problem. And the longer the season goes on, the more affected you're going to be by stress and the buildup of pressure as you go along. And your avoidance strategy only works while you're doing it. So it doesn't work when you go back into the pressure situation again. So learning coping strategies that can be used kind of like intermittently while you're under pressure or under stress is really important, because in a best of five situation, or in a situation where you're at Worlds or in a tournament where there isn't enough downtime, or you can't do your avoidance strategy or coping strategy, right? You might be in a country where it's not acceptable, kind of a thing, or you might not have the time, etc., or you might not have your support group around you that you normally would have. It becomes really hard then. So players should be able to find something that is, I guess, like unique to them, but something that they don't necessarily need to rely on other people for. And it needs to be something that scales well. It needs to be something that you can improve on, and you feel like that maybe, okay, I put effort into this. So you can feel better. You feel like there's a sense of accomplishment from it. So, for example, going out drinking might be something that players might do at the end of at the end of the week after their games, but it's difficult because there's going to be a literal hangover and also a non-literal hangover where they're going to be building up pressure and pressure and pressure, and then they know at the end of that 5-6 days you're going to get a chance to go back to that strategy again. But it's not going to give them the same benefit as they go along. They might need to increase the amount of times that they do it. They might need to increase the intensity of the drinking. That's just an example. And at a certain point, you just get diminishing returns from it. And let's say you finish the season, you don't make it to playoffs. Okay, great. The pressure is gone. You feel a little bit better. Fantastic. Let's say you go through playoffs, you go to finals, you go to worlds. Like, that coping strategy that you have is borderline destructive, but then you could have coping strategies that are avoidant and they're not that helpful. What you're looking for is a coping strategy that is more like helps with active recovery. There's some article that says LeBron James spends $1.5 million a year on his body
Yes.
regard like food and cryo and things like this. And it's a good article because the guy recognizes and understands the importance of active recovery versus passive. Passive being watching Netflix or drinking or whatever that might be. Active recovery is going to the gym, like playing an instrument, learning something, going to college. These are things that you have control over. That's going to give you some visceral benefit at the end of the day. So nothing can take away from that. No one's going to take that away. If you win or lose an LCS stage, you still have this pastime, hobby, or activity that you like to do. And I feel like that's really important for players because they're one team fight away from having a really fantastic week and being super happy with themselves, or one team fight away from being really sad and kind of bottling everything up or avoiding people and just feeling like the week was a failure. And I know that is the nature of competition across all sports, but it's very heavily uh, it's more important in esports because of the fact we don't have enough of that physical activity to kind of like burn away the emotions and like work through things. So I feel like esports athletes themselves, once they get in on the ground floor and they're younger, if they can start developing these coping strategies earlier, that are preventative rather than reactionary, it's really important.
Well said. Yeah. With that, like with players putting such an emphasis on like their performance, this kind of brought that up. Is like, do you find a lot of players they really put their identity around if they win or lose? And if they do, like how do you kind of get away from that and realize that you're more than just a player or just an athlete?
Some players that I've met are very, very good at putting the same effort into solo queue, scrims, and stage. They treat it the same. They try just as hard for every game that they're in. And then some players really struggle. They struggle emotionally with dealing with loss in the game. They've invested so much of their time. They've sacrificed so much in their life to get to where they are that it's it's a poor reflection on them or their self perception of who they are when something doesn't go correct. And League is still a team based game, so it's you're at the whim and mercy of your teammates or whoever you're with in order for you to have a success out of it. So you can try to 1v9, but the game is based so that you need your teammates to do exceptionally well. For different esports, like StarCraft, for example, players that I've worked with, it's completely different. The feeling that they have when they don't succeed leans a lot more towards like external attribution. So they're going to, let's say, either blame other people and luck, or if there's someone that's actually like a pro player that I've worked with in StarCraft, it's all internal. It's like, I could have tried harder. I should have done more. I should have practiced more. And they don't blame themselves so much as they blame the effort that they put in. So that's like the different mentality between an individual athlete and a team-based athlete, where it's a lot harder to deal with the emotions in a team-based environment because we're still not very, very good at discussing our emotions and like what's wrong with us. We're
Mhm.
still sitting in a group of 5 people requiring a mediator to help us talk to each other, or we're afraid to talk because we don't want to be seen as rocking the boat. But in StarCraft, it's just you're that one person who lost the game and you're just like kicking yourself, but you just immediately go back on the grind again because you haven't really been brought up in a situation where you have to bend the knee to anyone. It's just yourself. So you put all the work and put all the effort in yourself, and then when things go wrong, there's no one else to blame. And even in traditional sports, individual athletes have been shown to have a lot more higher indices of like mental toughness and things like this. They don't have that support group around them that team sports athletes do. So as a result, they're a lot more effort based and focus based in like what they can actually do themselves, like very self determined. Um, but I think it might just be that league players themselves are like continuously, like you said, bouncing around from team to team. So it's really hard to get a grasp on who my teammates are going to be and constantly adjusting your expectations and your relationship values between different players because you might be like, okay, I'm going to be on this team next year. And then suddenly you get traded. And then you've got to relearn how to play the game with 4 new people and a new coach. And that's a lot of emotional investment for certain players. So I'm not surprised that some players maybe shut off a little bit and let's say tune down their feelings or negative feelings regarding like how they feel after a loss, and they just become very work based. It's very uh, uh, very clinical at that point. So they're usually just get the job done and usually have a longer career because they're very process based rather than outcome based. But I think you'll probably see more of them as the career span of League of Legends players gets longer and longer, and they're in the game longer. They start developing these coping strategies to deal with uh, constantly being moved around from team to team. That's just like a theory that I have.
Kinda have to, yeah, in a way, at least as of right now.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I'll say this: I play a lot of team-based games, and I definitely blame lag and all these other things because I didn't get killed by the other person. But it's funny because it brings up like the conversation around like ego and like a lot of players who have big egos, who have a lot of skill, in a team-based environment. Like, do you see that as being a problem in some ways in esports with the teams you've worked with? And like, how do you address someone who has a big ego, and how do you get them to be more of a team player?
I think ego's not inherently bad. If you have a high skill potential and you have the propensity to showcase said skill a lot more than other people, you kind of need that ego. It's like Cristiano Ronaldo. So when he misses a shot, a free kick, a penalty, an open goal, he puts his hands on his hips. He looks around at like anything, teammates, the groundsman, the ball boy, the crowd, and he looks really upset. But that glare that he gives off is like, well, something happened. It wasn't my fault. It's outside of my control. And that protects his ego, right? He's constantly blaming something else. So his ego is always going to be unscathed. It's always going to be intact. He doesn't have to worry about it. So that when the next chance comes along, his confidence and ego, and they're linked in a lot of ways, is exactly the same. He's going to take the next chance. He's going to score it. He's going to celebrate. he did everything himself. He's going to pat himself on the back. You know, he's very self-congratulatory. When he celebrates, he just stands there, let his teammates come to him. Like these are things that he has developed to maintain his ego over time. Same thing goes for Jordan. Same thing goes for like almost every elite athlete has a way of preserving their ego somehow and maintaining it and building on it. And in esports, it's the same. The game itself as well is for solo queue is set up so that maybe you feel like you have to carry every game because your teammates aren't good enough. So you play in a certain way that necessitates you having to solo carry the game. You play very greedy, you play for yourself, etc., etc. And when you go into a team-based game, when you play, let's say, the games that you're playing or like LCS or whatever, you have to rely on your teammates a lot more because it's a lot harder to single-handedly carry the game yourself. So ego is kind of a problem in esports in the sense that we think of ego as a bad thing, but if we think of ego as this guy's really confident and this guy knows what he wants, and if he's very vocal in it and he can like get his teammates to play around him, then that ego is not necessarily a bad thing. There's obviously kind of toxic traits that you might have from ego, where they might belittle their teammates, they might minimize, they might try to like shirk off responsibility and blame other people for their mistakes. Then that's a toxic trait of ego. But if you have someone who has an ego but also spreads that around to his teammates, tries to build them up, tries to even be really persuasive, right? So use them to help you. A lot of the really, really good pros would be very selfish in terms of how they would use their teammates to help themselves. And that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as the other teammates buy into it and as long as their teammates are getting something back from it, like some sort of congratulations, recognition. Very, very important. And I think that we've kind of ostracized people that have egos in esports, but at the same time, to the public, we love them. We follow their Twitters. We retweet what they have to say. We like when they say something that's not very PC, and it's probably because it's becoming more and more of a clinical environment whereby there are PR people and people are like very wary about what they say. They don't want to be misconstrued, and also if you're not a superstar and you have an ego, it's going to be a lot harder for you to actually get on a team. It's going to be a lot harder for you to find a new team because people are going to go, yeah, he's got an ego. He's trouble and he's not even that good. So people have kind of learned to play the game a little bit more. They've learned to bite their tongue, and it might be good in the short term, but I actually think it kind of holds them back a little bit because communication is kind of like a lost art right now. There's a lot of players that struggle to communicate not just what they want in the game, but like what their needs are outside of the game, what their desires are, what their needs are, and that kind of needs to be brought out of people because you want people to be comfortable, you want people to contribute, and the only way for people to contribute is to make them feel like it's a safe space and they're allowed to speak, and whatever they say won't be held against them. And a lot of the time, there's always that big mouth in the room, the guy with the loud voice that will say you're wrong, and he sounds really confident, and maybe he's got a lot more experience. So younger players obviously would just say, okay, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. This guy's obviously going to tell me what to do, and then they kind of just become like a sheep, kind of following this guy, and they are learning along the way, but not an it's not an equal opportunity sport at that point, right? We're kind of playing for one guy. So I would say egos aren't a problem. The problem is that it's like the wealth distribution in the world. Some people have all of it, and some people don't have any of it. And I think if you try to balance it out as much as possible to build up the guys that are a little bit quieter and don't really have that ego, while bringing down the guys that have that ego, you've got a much more fully functioning team at the end of the day. Um, I don't know what your take on ego is in esports regarding, let's say, performance coaching, and like how would we deal with someone who has an ego coming into a team where maybe, like you said, two cases. Sometimes people are really, really energized and excited to work with you, and then some people who aren't, who are just like, no, I've gotten here off my own merits. I don't need any help. Like, how would you actually deal with that?
It's a good question, and you bring up a lot of good points there. I would do it in a similar way of how you mentioned it, is like realizing that ego, there's a lot of stigma to that, but recognizing that it can be a strength too. So as a team, and what I would try to do is try to find some sort of like reference data, whether that's like them actually playing and when they were successful or when they weren't successful, and showing them, oh, hey guys, you played really well whenever you were playing as a team. It wasn't just the one person playing selfish for themselves. and then just seeing where that goes. But of course, it all starts with the relationship, like we had talked about in the beginning, and where that trust is at as well. But really trying to show them that it can be a strength. It's just how you basically figure out what the composition is going to be like, and then developing the communication. I think that that's one of the most important mental skills in esports. Like you had said, communicating not only in game but out of the game. How do you communicate with your coaches? How do you communicate with the organization to get your needs? Because we all need needs, whether it's physiological, our relationships, things like that. How do you communicate and how do you get that? And it's tough for those people who are quieter. They don't feel like they maybe can voice their opinions as much or ask for help. And it's just being able to work with the coaches and the management to be able to try to create that environment. If you can do that around, I think, the person who has the high ego, like, they're going to be forced one way or another to try to either use their defense mechanisms to get to bring things back to where it was, or they're going to have to adapt to the situation. And I think that if it's a superstar player, that's really hard to do. But if it's like a player, like you had said, who's not a superstar, like, then you have a much better chance of them probably adapting to the model. But it's an interesting question, and that's kind of how I would go about it, at least to start off. But I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that as well.
I think the communication aspect that you mentioned, like, that's 100%. Like, one of the big things that I feel like players are trending towards recently in terms of what they want, and what I've heard from them is like, we want open, honest, clear communication. We want you to tell me exactly what we're doing wrong, what you like from us, what you don't like from us, what we can do differently, that kind of a thing. Because I feel like maybe a few years ago, like I said, like, everyone is trying to play relatively nice. They're trying to protect and keep safe their position and their job. They're trying to do, it's kind of like a work to rule. We're just going to do exactly what we're told, and we won't really do more, because at the end of the day, as long as we do what we're told, we'll be okay. But the majority of the teams that are successful, like very successful, are ones that are actually relatively dysfunctional. They have differing ideas, differing personalities, differing takes on the game. And even in traditional sports, the more different the teammates are from each other, the more success they're going to have. Teams that share the same idea about how to play and how to go about things, they look good, they sound good, it feels great. It's like the Waltons, like a really happy family, but they don't quite reach that next level. You need that, like, permanent, like, but professional discourse between players in order to break through ceilings. And I feel like we haven't had that. And I think players are playing according to how they feel like they should be accepted, rather than, like, constantly being pushed to be more, to be better. And most, if told, hey, I need you to play this champion, I need you to do this differently, they'll listen and they'll try their best. But it's the ones where they're kind of like given no feedback, where it can be a little bit tough. There's been a lot of, like, research in terms of people are much, much happier getting negative feedback than they are getting no feedback at all. So you want to be able to constantly be giving this feedback to players, like letting them know what you like, what you don't like, and how they can improve and see things differently. And it needs to be, like, reciprocal. It needs to be like asking the players, like, okay, like, what can we do differently? What did you like about this? What didn't you like? And it's really trying to get, like, a really good grasp of how well do you know someone. So the more time you spend with someone, the more questions you ask them, the more you put them in different situations, the more you challenge them, the more you're going to know about them. And with all of this information, you're going to know how to, I guess, like, set their goals, how to push their buttons, how to pull them back, how to get them going. And that's not just esports, that's people, that's relationships, it's management,
Mhm.
it's everything, honestly. And it doesn't matter if your job is to make them food, teach them mental skills, teach them about League of Legends, whatever it might be. Like, it's the most important thing. We had a chef Mo in Misfits, and he was the nicest guy. So, like, here was a guy that knew exactly what to tell me, like a dad, in terms of, like, he'll say something that would be like, "Oh, I agree with you, yeah." And sometimes it was harsh truth. Sometimes it's like, "You're not doing this, and you should be doing this more." And I'm like, "Damn, he's right. Okay, I need to actually, like, listen to him and do what he's saying, because he makes comments like perfect sense. It's common sense." And I'd wake up in the morning, the first thing I'd do would be go into him, because he'd be cooking in the kitchen, and he would make me feel really good about the day coming up. He'd make me feel really good about myself, and like that human aspect he had down. Everyone that went to him, like brought in their dishes to put in the dishwasher. He'd say something to them like "great game" or "tough game," whatever it might be. He knew what to say. Like he was very much ahead of his time. So he's like a shining example of like how you can just be a good people person and you can have a huge effect on the culture of a team. Like he was amazing.
That's awesome. That's amazing. I think, yeah, having those people skills, and again, going back to the coaches, like as a coach, a lot of times I think in esports, at least from what I've seen, the coaches are really young and they're inexperienced. They don't necessarily have the coaching skill set you would see in traditional sports. And because of that, a lot of times there's a huge focus on them as players because they need to get results. Because if they don't get results, then they might not have a job in the next year or 2 years or whatever it is. Um, but yeah, focusing on like the players and then the organization as human beings, like helps you go even much farther in terms of like creating that positive environment and even helping with performance too. That I think that's so important. I'm interested. So like for anyone that may be watching that's an aspiring professional player or aspiring professional coach, like from your vast amount of experiences, like what would you recommend to them as some tips to have as they go about that journey?
Really good question. It it depends on how far along you are in terms of your, I guess, like development as a person and as a coach. If you've been coaching for a long time, then you probably understand exactly what you stand for, what your priorities are, what your truths are, where you're going to allow people to push you and where you're actually going to say no, like I won't be pushed in this situation. And these aren't things in terms of like topics or like strategy. This is in terms of like your values, right? Something that you stand for. So the longer you've been in the game, the more you should understand. If someone says like, "What are your values?" You should be able to talk about this. And it just shows that you have like that introspection. That shows that you've been challenged in certain areas before, so you've had to develop these values. Your values aren't, let's say, you pick up a book from a different coach and you copy him because it sounds really good. Your values are, this is my pillar of my life because this is what happened to me when I was younger, and this has always stuck with me. This has always found me success and some sort of solitude in my heart. And there are things that even if you weren't coaching, if you weren't doing this job, that you would still bring into other walks of life as well. So for younger coaches that are thinking like, I want to coach, they're just thinking about sitting in front of five guys and teaching them League of Legends or CS:GO, whatever it might be, and they're like, now I'm coaching. Coaching is a lot more than that. Coaching is, it's the people aspect. It's the figuring out how to work with different people. And I've worked with a lot of coaches that can actually see this. They can actually put the person first rather than the player. And I would say you need to invest your time into yourself. You need to put yourself in situations that make you question why you certain way, do certain things. Put yourself into situations where, like hypotheticals, like what would I do in this situation? I think I've learned most from talking with other coaches, like talking with you and talking with other people that have had different but like similar situations to me in life, and bouncing off ideas about like, this is what I did. What would you have done? This is what you did. Okay, this is what I would have done. This is why. And thinking about like what you would have done in different situations like opens up like so many different avenues in terms of like what you might potentially have the option to do later on. And I would say if you're starting off and you're younger, you have so many years ahead of you. Like there are coaches that have been coaching traditional sports for 20, 30, 40 years, and they're not the same person that they were from the beginning of their career compared to the end. Everything changes you. Every time you go into a team and meet a new person and experience loss and success, you change a little bit inside. So if you allow yourself to be touched by these situations and you learn from them and you're aware of them, then you're going to change a lot more. But if you tend to like just say, ah, it's whatever, I'm just going to move forward to next season and not learn from it, learning from mistakes and opportunities, then you're not going to change as much. So I would say you don't have to be a coach in order to start working on being a better coach. You kind of have to start now. Um, and yeah, it's a lifelong process. I've Some of the coaches I've worked with are a lot older and they're wise, and some of the coaches that I've worked with are a lot younger and they also have the same depth of knowledge and life experiences as other people. But you're never going to figure it out until you actually start talking with them. So I would say reach out to as many different people as possible that maybe are in your line of work, and be nice, and tell them why you're messaging them. Try to get in a call with them, try to talk with them, and try to just learn as much as possible from people who are in that position that you want to be in yourself.
Well said. Yes. Really like the growth mindset. Definitely. When you have obstacles come up, learn from those opportunities. That's going to help make you a better person and a better coach. But this has been great, Robert. Thank you so much for your time and having this chat, being on the show. Like, I hope this information has been helpful for those that have been able to check it out. So where can people find you at online if they want to connect with you?
My handle for Twitter and for Instagram is @CoachYip. That's YIP. So it's probably the best way to find me. And I post articles sometimes and tweets sometimes. But if anyone wants to reach out, like I said, if you're interested in performance coaching or coaching in general, I'd love to jump in a call, chat with you guys, and hopefully you guys can get something out of it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Cheers. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I had a great time chatting with Robert and learning more about his knowledge and experiences when it comes to mental performance in esports. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more Path to Pro Series videos coming up each month.